Hey everybody, welcome back to a new episode of DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. And today, we've got not just one guest, but we've got two guests.
Exactly, it's a world premiere and we're here with Zoey and Dan from SIDESTREAM. Welcome you two, how are you doing?
Hi Alex, hi Michael, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited to talk to you and see what the next hour brings.
Yeah, likewise. And before we get started, as you already mentioned, we're here, the four of us. I'm here with Michael Thiessen, who is an educator and content creator all around the Vue ecosystem. Amazing blog posts, amazing courses, and the Nuxt tips collection, where there's the little discount code in the description. The code DejaVue will net you a little discount if you haven't bought the tips collection yet.
And my co-host Alex, who is a Nuxt core team member, as well as producing lots of content and amazing other things all around the internet and in person if you manage to see him at a conference and, get to say hi. We have got, as we've said, these two guests here, Zoey, who is a developer at SIDESTREAM and core maintainer of Sidebase. So we'll get into what the difference is there between SIDESTREAM and Sidebase. And, you might have seen her around on GitHub with Nuxt Auth. I know I use Nuxt Auth and have been, seeing some things there. And we've also got Dan, who is one of the co-founders of SIDESTREAM.
Yeah, and maybe that brings us straight away to the point. Maybe some people heard Sidebase probably a bit more in the developer ecosystem than SIDESTREAM, but the names are pretty close to each other. So maybe it's a good start to understand what SIDESTREAM is, and then what's the difference to Sidebase and how that's related.
Yeah, I take this one. So in 2018, we started SIDESTREAM. So it's me and my co-founder Niels. You might know him from GitHub as Bracket John. And so we just put like a software development agency with a focus on high quality software development. And we kind of grew the company to 25 people, and with the goal to really have a working culture where we want to show up every day and just do good work. And then in 2022, we created this nonprofit spin-off Sidebase, where we basically took a lot of good things that we built in over 100 projects for our software development agency customers and created a starter that we open sourced, and also created a lot of modules that we kind of needed ourselves but didn't find in the next Vue ecosystem.
Yeah, and that was around the time when Nuxt was migrating from version 2 to version 3. And coincidentally, it was also actually the time where I was doing my internship at SIDESTREAM. So I began working at SIDESTREAM in 2021. And I kind of started, honestly, because I was feeling really lonely and also really bored due to COVID. So I had recently just started studying in the Netherlands, in Maastricht. And I moved in 2020. I basically stayed the entire time inside of my apartment due to different lockdown restrictions and began working on some fun side projects. But even those, after a while, start to become stale. So that kind of motivated me to look around and see if I can find some software development jobs that would interest me and kind of fit my portfolio. And I spontaneously stumbled over SIDESTREAM. And after continuing my studies, it was time to do an internship. And this kind of perfectly had a magical alignment with the stars and ended up in me starting Sidebase together with Niels. And I've been loving the work on it ever since.
Amazing. Yeah, that's sometimes how the world is going. Such a great fit eventually. And it's also interesting to see that as a, let's say, software agency with more than 25 people right now, that you all bet on modern technologies such as Nuxt.js. So maybe let's talk about how that came, because I guess when you started the software agency, it was not let's just randomly spin the wheel and see which of the gazillion JavaScript frameworks you pick, if it's a JavaScript framework at all. So how did that happen eventually?
Yeah, so I mean, as always with startups, not the first idea worked. So in September 2018, Niels and I basically left our jobs to start something. And for the first year, we were just building 24/7 all kinds of products. I think the first one was a disposable email service. We had a fintech that shall help you save money for your retirement. We also created a hardware product with a web app that was supposed to help beekeepers to better take care of their bees.
Interesting.
And all these things, they had one thing in common, or at least one thing in common, and we always used Vue and Nuxt to build the front ends. And I think when we actually left our jobs, we weren't really front-end developers, so we both came more from the Python side of things. And so we just picked a framework that had apparently like a good learning curve to quickly get into. I think on the first weekend, working with Nuxt, we already shipped this disposable email servers.
Wow.
So it was just a very good experience. And yeah, since then we just kept it forever. And of course, we went through some improvements. We can also talk about this later, how we changed our tech stack over time. But I think the one constant since the first day was actually Vue and Nuxt.
Amazing. So, like you said, you were not front-end developers by trade. So you all came from the back-end Python side, and eventually picked Vue because it seemed to be the easiest to learn, and then also Nuxt.js.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we both had experience with like a bit of Angular, a bit of React, but not like on a professional level. And I mean, I wouldn't do this again, that I learn a new technology while building a business. That was not a good idea in my opinion. But yeah, the pick for Vue and Nuxt was a good decision.
Glad to hear that, of course. And I understand it's just double the work and effort and exhaustion if you like build something and then you have to like discover things and like think ahead of what to do with the business side, and then also from the development side you can't build as fast because you have to learn. But yeah, luckily, I mean, with Vue and Nuxt, you can still ship fast, as you just said, with like, oh yeah, I know, first weekend, just like casually throw out the disposable email website. That's pretty strong. Like, yeah, pretty amazing work.
Yeah, so from my side, I actually came from a mixture of React and PHP, and I was introduced to Vue and Nuxt through SideStream. I think for the most part, sort of Vue 2 and its entire option syntax had always kind of thrown me off, which is why I would say like I didn't initially begin working in Vue myself. But yeah, after getting into Vue 2 and becoming more familiar with it and actually enjoying it, the migration to Vue 3 just completely sucked me in. And I don't really see any way that I would go back to React or Angular anytime soon with the developments that Vue and the Nuxt ecosystem is making at the moment.
Perfect. That's always good to hear because it's interesting. Let's just bring a little side story in there. Like I've heard from quite some people saying like, oh yeah, because the React ecosystem is bigger, the whole like job market topic, but it was also like thematized in countless Reddit threads and even with Evan when he was on the episode. And I think there are some points where like, okay, if you have lots of libraries available, because there are, of course, if there are more people in the React world, there might be more libraries. I think still like in the Vue universe, we have a lot of things that just work and still also a lot of innovation that, well, other framework systems might long for. So even though we don't have that many people compared to others, I think we're still pretty strong in terms of innovation and also time to market. So we just make things easy.
Using Nuxt and Vue in a freelance, like, or not a freelance, but an agency like you have, how have you found that? Like, do clients care what tech stack you're using, first of all, and like, how's their experience with it, and how is your experience with it? Do you find that is it easy to hire people to do that, to use Nuxt, or do you just find people and then, you know, train them up on Nuxt and Vue, or how does that work for you with this agency?
Yeah, very good question. I think when we started, we were very afraid. So, I mean, to close the story, so we had all these different products, and they all like the email service and the fintech and so on. And yeah, at some point we ran out of money. So the usual startup story. So we started to freelance. And yeah, of course, we were building everything in Vue and Nuxt. And so we thought, yeah, we would just offer this, but we're very afraid of what you just asked, that they will all want to have React developers. But we quickly learned that the tech stack, like to certain customers, doesn't really matter that much as long as it's modern. So because if they are in need for software development, they usually, they don't have a like very strong opinion on technologies, but they of course want to be future proven or future oriented. So it was not a very it's till this day also not a very big topic like which front end stack we use. where we made a slightly different experience was with our backend. So in the past it was in Python, and there actually it was, so we went away. That maybe we talk about this later from Python, but this was always a big topic for our customers. So because this was a much more established language in their organizations, and they wanted to keep it. But for front-end technologies, it was quite smooth. So we probably lost a few projects because they weren't React, but not many, and mostly they just care about the results. For the second part of your question, so about hiring talent. So we educate people a lot. So we actually hire a lot of people from university that don't have a main tech stack yet, and then we can basically, with our proven processes, bring them on a very good level in a very short amount of time. But for more senior people, of course, we are looking actively in the Vue ecosystem and hire people who already have experience so that they can help our organization to improve their tech capabilities and, of course, educate the new joiners.
And how would you say, because it's also like a very frequent topic, like the job market, once again, like, do you feel if you're looking for like more senior people in the Vue space that it's hard to find? Would you say like, okay, especially if you're involved in the community, it's a bit easier? And also given what you offer with Sidebase, which we'll talk about also more in detail in a bit, would you say that it kind of helps finding people, or even say the right people for the job?
Yeah, I think that it's a mix of all of those things that you mentioned helps. So we never have actually problems of finding the right people that we need. So it's just a good, if you have a good engineering culture and you use modern technologies, and of course it helps to have these like side bets like Sidebase. I think this mix is quite unique, and of course we are just 25 people, so we don't need to hire like tons of people, but just very selectively. That was always like, I think it's something that works well for us.
I think another very important factor that I at least found when I was going through the recruitment process at SideStream was kind of the methods used to get to know each other in a sense. And I think this is something that very much convinced me of the company when I was first applying. And it's that there's no real, I would say, like corporate interview and also no corporate test to like prove your skills. So ever since I applied at SideStream up until now, whenever people do apply to the company, they have a quick welcome chat, and then they complete something that we call a work teaser. And this is like a full kind of like application created in our tech stack with a couple of demo issues, as you would probably get them in your day-to-day work. And you would get these issues, and you could then work through these issues by yourself and kind of also share your thoughts and what you were doing and how you approached a certain issue. And based off that, we will then give you a bunch of feedback and basically do like a pull request review on it. And this work teaser gives us a good chance to kind of already get to know the programming style and how this person would approach an issue. And at the same time, it gives applicants a really nice overview and insight into how they can kind of like expect their working life to be at SideStream.
Yeah, that sounds like a good process to have to, as opposed to doing these like arbitrary random questions like, implement a binary search tree or something like, okay, how often are you actually doing this in your real job? Or like, how many windows are there in, this city? And like, okay, like, are these actually, like, what are you actually testing here,
Yeah, what are the relevant questions? Like, nobody cares if you can reverse a linked list if you're applying for like a full stack position. So I also like it a lot that it's more like a, let's say, near real life test to see, okay, first of all, how comfortable is the person with that task? And you also have I think, a good variety of like, okay, it's a bit of JavaScript, of course, also in a tech stack, so Vue and Nuxt. But you can also see, okay, does the person have like the basic skills for that position without any arbitrary questions? So yeah, that's definitely a big plus point compared to other interview processes. And so we mentioned Sidebase a lot by now, and we already got like a brief overview of how it eventually originated and roughly what it is. So maybe that's a good point to continue from there. well, you were using Vue and Nuxt and then started open source? Because before, if I'm not mistaken here, please correct me if I'm wrong. You as a company, as like SideStream, you never did like much in open source in terms of like, hey, we open source our a package or we open source something we built. So how did that happen? Of like, okay, let's just do that. Let's just open source it. Maybe what was the intention behind it, and what are the benefits?
So I think it was not really planned. Like it just happened. I mean, Zoe mentioned that it was like this time when Nuxt 3 was very early, and we kind of. So, and the other thing is we have the advantage that we just start a lot of projects, right? So we don't have like one fixed project, but we maybe start like a project every 1 or 2 months. So I think it was September 2022 by the time Nuxt 3 was very early, but we already used it in probably 10 or more projects, like with our customers. And we needed to start a kind of ourselves, right? To just basically offer to the customers like a head start into a project. So not like the first 10 days of work, nothing happens, but we have to start it and we just copy it. And then you already have a lot of things in place before we even started billing for time. So we used this for the whole like year of 2022. But then to pull the trigger, I think that was a bit of a rogue action by Niels John. So on this one weekend, he just did like all the work that was required to like make the starter open source ready, and then just tweeted about it, and the tweet went viral. And then when we all came back to office on Monday, everyone was super hyped about Sidebase, and then we started developing a proper roadmap and allocated time and so on. But this initial launch, it was just a rogue action by Niels.
Yeah, and I think the funny part about that is he even did that while he was going on vacation. So he pushed this tweet out on a Sunday evening when he was sitting at the airport, flying to his vacation. And I remember coming back to work on Monday and in the morning receiving a text message from Dan. We need a website for Sidebase. I'm like, okay, what am I working with here? What's kind of the time frame? Oh yeah, I would like to have it by this afternoon. And I think this was kind of like the first moment where I was like, okay, let's get started. Let's work on Sidebase a bit more. So that Monday after the tweet was pushed out, I was then just quickly trying to spin up a website. Obviously, like not having a lot of time to perfect it, but just getting something out there. And I remember a few days later, we then produced like a YouTube video, also super funny looking back at it. I'm sure that you will be able to find it if you just search for Sidebase on YouTube.
We'll probably put it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, of course. And it's just screen recordings of like starting up the project and kind of like these very early looks into Nuxt, which I think is always like a blast from the past.
Amazing, but I really love that story, especially the best part is like, oh yeah, let's just push it, like it's open source ready, there we go. And okay, Niels is going on vacation, goodbye. Now you come to office on Monday, like, oh, what happened? And you have to deal with it, quote unquote. That's fun. But yeah, it went so well. Like there was lots of positive feedback on the whole thing. And it's still like, I think one of the most common like free starter options for Nuxt.js at the time of recording, I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we do keep looking into Sidebase, and primarily at this point, it's been renamed to Create Sidebase. So originally, like Dan had mentioned, we created a GitHub template repository that we would just copy over and then use for all of our agency projects. The issue with that, though, was the more complex the template became, the harder it was to customize it for every project in the way that we needed it. So at some point, we then developed a CLI based on this original Sidebase starter, which actually pulls in the newest Nuxt starter base template and then starts building upon it. And I think our notion from the very beginning with Create Sidebase has been, it's not going to replace the Nuxt add command. So we never wanted to add anything that you could install with one command or just installing a package and adding it to the Nuxt modules. That was never really the goal or focus of Sidebase. It was always to kind of start a project with a few more complex settings and setup things that weren't easy to do on your own. So everything that needed more steps of documentation than just installing and adding to the Nuxt modules is something that we were potentially ready to add to Sidebase. And I think we still try to keep the selection of what you can add to Sidebase very limited. I personally also think that the more we add, the more complex it gets, which then takes away from the beauty of it. And
True.
I remember at the very beginning, we had quite a long discussion. How many component libraries do we want to add? And we were thinking, okay, at the moment, we are loving naive UI, especially for our agency projects where we need a few very complex components, which this library does have. And then people started asking for Prime View and Ant Design. And then later on, Nuxt UI also came out. And we were debating, do we want to add selections for all these different component libraries? But in the end, we kind of decided, let's keep it simple. This is oriented around our preferred tech stack at the moment, and it's going to change and adapt with the things that we use at the same time. And I think that was a really good decision, because I do know a lot of CLIs and starter tools that just overwhelm you with options and choices. And especially if you're just trying to get into Nuxt, which is also kind of like the goal of Sidebase, getting people into the Nuxt ecosystem, helping them just set up this first test Nuxt app, you're not going to really know what the difference is between all these different packages or options that you would have. And I think that's why we decided to keep the CLI pretty simple.
Yeah, on that note, it like really reminds me in terms of complexity, like the Nuxt 2 wizard, when you like had create Nuxt app back then, like, of course, if you know exactly, I want this, that's lovely. It will save you some time. But I remember the sheer amount of component libraries in there, like, what are all these? Which should I pick? What makes sense? And I think that's also one of the reasons why we don't have like a wizard in Nuxt 3 right now. There is an issue for that, also linked in the show notes, because I know some people are asking about it very often. But yeah, having the right balance between what should you ask for and what's just like one step too much, especially for people who also just want to start a bit more minimal. Just like right now, it's like Nuxt 3, if you start with like Nuxi in it, it's pretty minimal and that's great. But then people are like, oh yeah, what can I do? I could read the docs and spend hours on that or minutes, but I don't do it. So I just want to have all the things to take a look at. And yeah, it's hard to balance. And I think the same applies to a starter in the end and the CLI.
So right now, what are the things that the starter comes with? If you're going to start a new project, what can you expect? What are the options that you can get with this starter?
Yeah, so Sidebase has always been focused around being a full stack Nuxt 3 starter. In theory, you could bootstrap it without the backend parts, but I do feel that those are the most powerful components that you can add to the starter because they normally require the most setup. So I would say like the two base components that really make Sidebase useful, in my opinion, are Prisma and TRPC. And both of these modules and packages in general are a bit tricky to get set up in Nuxt properly. Also, looking into both of them, there are modules available for it. There are packages available from the libraries themselves. And each one of them does things slightly different. And I think they all do a really great job in what they're trying to achieve. But through the long time we've spent in Nuxt 3, especially with this Prisma and TRPC stack, I feel like we've gotten quite confident in what setup works best for us. And that is what we added to Sidebase. And for both TRPC and Prisma, we use every package from the organizations themselves. So we refrain from using more Nuxt modules or trying to like install other packages that may wrap them, because we figured out that especially with these backend routes, it's really best to just get the things from the source. And we fell into that same trap at the beginning because initially we actually developed a Nuxt Prisma module and a Nuxt TRPC module. Just to see how that would work. And at the beginning, Sidebase was using these. But we did notice that these are two packages that are just kind of better imported directly instead of having another wrapper on top of it. So yeah, those two kind of make up the base core of it. Then we obviously also add our own modules to the selection. So in this case, Nuxt Auth being another very big one, which also requires more configuration than just installing it and adding it to the Nuxt modules section, especially if you're using OAuth providers or trying to create a more complex login flow. So in Create Sidebase, you get a GitHub provider and a credentials provider configured out of the box, as well as page protection on certain page routes, which does give you quite a nice starting point to then continue configuring the providers as you would need yourselves. We also added a lot of in-code comments to what we generate, that it's not just, oh, here's your code, have fun. but you also get small indications on what does this actually do now exactly, or linking it to further docs where you can actually read more about it. So it really focuses on kind of giving you this helping hand in continuing to work with it. Yeah, and then lastly, we have a few styling options, and I would say these are more the optional parts that you can install if you'd like, which is Naive UI, the component library I mentioned before, Tailwind CSS, and we recently also integrated the internalization module from Nuxt, Nuxt I18N, after we started enforcing it in a lot of our agency projects as well. Yeah, and this pretty much makes up the base selection of what you can add to Sidebase. So like I mentioned, quite limited and quite small in scope, but I feel like that by focusing on these core elements, we can do that really well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds reasonable to be more opinionated and saying, okay, this is what works well for us, so we provide it to the other people as well. And if you have a similar use case, maybe you want to throw a not naive UI, but yeah, maybe Nuxt UI or Prime Vue or Vuetify or whatsoever, then you're free to do that, right? You don't have to choose naive UI to work with Sidebase. You can just select, let's not use it and use all the rest of it.
So you had mentioned that you had wrapped the Prisma and the TRPC packages, and then you found that it wasn't actually worth wrapping at all. What were the issues that you ran into where you found it was getting in your way?
So I think if I focus on Prisma specifically, the entire like small little configuration areas and ways to hook into Prisma. Writing a wrapper around Prisma and then still allowing for the level of configuration that you could get from the base module is very difficult. And this included things like defining your own Prisma middleware, augmenting the types, extending it further, adding other database providers. And this became very challenging to maintain. And I would say also generally just the fact that every time Prisma did an update, we would have to update all the modules accordingly, just generally resulted in a system where we didn't add much to the module itself that the module couldn't do itself, and just added more layers of abstraction on top of it that, at least in my opinion, retrospectively, were not necessarily needed.
Yeah, I also can second that experience because maybe some of the listeners know the whole topic around the Sentry SDK or module, a long-standing issue. But luckily, also they're plugging that already. There's an alpha version of the Nuxt SDK available right now. Link also in the show notes. Definitely give it a spin, give it a try. I'm very happy to see that Sentry is building a known SDK for Nuxt by now. Also with the help of the Nuxt team for some questions and back and forth. But I wrote a blog post to like, okay, look, I tried building a module for that, but the big issue is like, yeah, making it work for every developer. And I remember that one of the Sentry people was even like retweeting the tweet back. And it's like, yeah, I also shared with our engineers, and it resonates very well with the problems we have of like, okay, here's our, I don't know, error monitoring and performance monitoring suite. Let's make it work for all languages, all frameworks, everything, for every, like even the weirdest requirements. And that's super difficult. And then even if you say, okay, it's not even the software that you build, it's the wrapper around that for a starter kit. So you have such a high level of abstraction that's super difficult to build an interface that works for everyone without like giving an option to like, okay, let's eject from there. And that's also, I'm a big fan of like using a recipe in favor of a module if it makes sense. So like, hey, here, this is how you can initialize it in terms of starter. That's the code. Here you go. You can do whatever you want with it, but you own your implementation.
I think that's actually a great way of putting it. And that's exactly what we use Create Sidebase for, to primarily give those recipes directly to you into your code editor or into your project, and adding the things where we say, okay, a Nuxt module may not be the best option to actually add this to your project.
Totally makes sense. And maybe from here, pivoting once again back to SideStream, like, okay, Sidebase became more popular, Nuxt Auth, this will also be a blog we'll talk about dedicatedly about the Nuxt Auth module of the Sidebase organization. But how would you say open source benefited, like how did SideStream benefit from making Sidebase being open source and being in that space?
Yeah, I think when we open sourced it, there was this natural reaction of a lot of people that, okay, it's a spin out now and we need to find a way to make it sustainable, also maybe monetize it. That was like a very natural reaction by a lot of employees and by myself as well. So we had a few brainstorming sessions. Okay, what's a good maybe business model for Sidebase? Came up with all the usual suspects. But then if you really like do the math, we have a very well working business at SideStream. And yeah, we need all the manpower actually to run it. So it's actually much better to label Sidebase just as a non-profit that gives a lot of other benefits to us. And yeah, that brings me to your question. So I think one emotional thing that it brings to many of us is that we have finally our own product. So something where we can take care of daily, because I mean we have very long-lasting projects in the agency also for years, and we take care of them very well. But the thing is still that it's not ours. So any day the customer can come and take it away from us, and so we kind of always had this emotional thing that we need some baby, we need something to take care of. Also there's much more motivation of people to take care of Sidebase on the weekends or fix issues on the weekends than of course for some agency customer. That's one big thing, but then there are also a lot of other smaller things as we talked about, so attracting talent, being close to the Nuxt core team, and also kind of understanding how to raise concerns that we might have in our day-to-day developments. And also it's just fun to be in the community and contribute. So I think these are all the drivers of putting daily work into Sidebase.
100%. I also think, as you mentioned, open source, for lots of people, open source is like a hobby or a little side project, but also being able to do it both as a hobby, but also during your work hours is a real benefit. Because also, I think if you build things in an agency, of course you have projects they're out and it's hey, I don't know, this e-commerce solution or this dashboard, dashboard is even worse because just a handful of people might see it. If e-commerce the shop is hey, you can show, hey, this is what I built, look. But with open source, it's also more okay, I contribute to what potentially thousands, even more, maybe people use. And this also has a long-lasting impact. So I think that's in a way also a really good intrinsic motivation of people yeah, nice, I want to work on that. It's fun.
Yeah, for me, the community is a big factor in why I really enjoy working on and kind of maintaining Sidebase. So I interact with so many different people from all around the world, and we kind of have this one combining factor, which is Nuxt. And I always love hopping into calls or also just chatting with people, primarily through Sidebase. And I've seen so many really cool projects and other initiatives that are using Sidebase to then kind of build up their product. And through Sidebase, I've just been able to get this really nice insight into what other people are working on. And obviously, it has also opened up so many contact avenues for me, and has kind of also motivated us to be a bit more active inside the community, if it's attending conferences, joining calls with other people, or generally also just opening up issues or pull requests inside of the Nuxt repos itself. So I think the community is one of the biggest driving factors for me, and kind of continuing the work on Sidebase and ensuring that it stays up to date and works.
That sounds like a lot of fun. You're tempting me to start my own side project in open source. I don't know if I have time for that, but I've got so many ideas for side projects. I feel like every episode someone comes on here and talks about something really cool, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should do that too. And
but
so
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's true. But it's I think with people getting inspired by these stories, about people going hey, this is a super cool library, try it out, or hey, we have this cool open source project, why not contribute? I think that's a really good way also to see what's out there and people working on it with passion. Why people even doing it, right? What's the motivation behind it? And for example, the community aspect is a big one, and also it brings you further in a way of I never had a formal supervisor in terms of code. I had no one ever reviewing my code at work, and open source was more or less my mentor. People in open source were reviewing, criticizing, and that helped a lot, and that helps a lot of people out there. So it's also a really good way to improve your skills and learn from the best of the best out there. Because lots of maintainers and library authors, they're pretty smart people. So yeah, also, once again, people get into open source, do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think what you just mentioned, even on Sidebase, when we were quite small and still starting up, we were already getting pull requests by Daniel Rowe or also by yourself. And I think this kind of shows that the Nuxt maintainers are active inside of their community. And even if you just start a small project, the chance that you're going to get a review or you're going to get help and you're going to learn more things from other people is very high. And you don't necessarily need to go searching for it. I think eventually, just by the Nuxt community, people are going to become aware of your project and you're going to learn more about it, which I think is awesome. It's really lowering the bar to being able to publish something in open source. And that also takes me kind of like to my next point on developing Nuxt modules, especially for Nuxt 3. Because when I first started working on Sidebase, I had honestly no idea what I was doing. And I had published 1 or 2 NPM packages before, maximum. But just generally the process of bootstrapping and setting up a package that I could then distribute on NPM was such a foreign and hard concept to me, especially when you then want to integrate TypeScript, that when I began developing my first Nuxt modules, I was really surprised by how easy it was. And I feel like that is also one of the main benefits that I see for Nuxt, and also where the barrier to entry is the lowest of all the different major frameworks out there. Developing a package for React or Angular is, at least in my opinion, a lot harder than it is for Nuxt. And Alex, you had mentioned before that some people may say, oh, the Nuxt ecosystem isn't as big as the React or the Angular ecosystem, where I would kind of counter that and say, it's become so easy to expand on this ecosystem and just create your own module, take a port of something else and make it available for Nuxt 3 yourself, that that isn't really a factor for me anymore. If I'm missing a certain feature or a certain packet and it exists as a regular TypeScript or JavaScript package, I can easily just add that to Vue and create a great developer experience, a great integration for it, in less time than I would probably need to create the same package for React or for Angular.
Yeah, but that's definitely true. Like the Nuxt module integration, also compared to most of the major frameworks out there, at least what I tried, is none of the big ones has a similar way of okay, let's just add things, extend things, and you need it. Even if you write your own module for in your company, right? Just okay, here are our ways of dealing with things, with our data integration, with our with our CMS that has a weird requirement. That's a great way of doing it, and then sharing it around, either open source it or in your company. I've seen it also multiple times, and it makes things really easy when it comes to code reuse.
So I have a question about how you started with Sidebase. So you mentioned that you had 100 different client projects that you had done in the past with Nuxt. So how do you go from all of these projects where you've written lots of code for maybe the same things over and over again to then creating this starter? Did you go back to previous projects and pull out code from there, or did you start from scratch just with what you had learned, or what was that process like for you?
I think it was mainly, so we were building the starter internally over the years. So we also had one for Nuxt 2 back then. It was just a natural thing, because if you start a new project every month, then you just want to, and then you always hear from the team on the previous project, this went well and this went well. Let's do it a bit different next time. And so every project is a bit of greenfield and an opportunity to just have a cleaner start. And if you do this 50 or 100 times, then in the end, you have a pretty good result. And I think to this day, we every project we start is an opportunity to test out 1 or 2 new things. And if they are good, they might make it to Sidebase one day. So that's how we think about it. And then the open sourcing of the starter was quite natural once we had a starter we were confident with.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it really gets born from necessity. So we develop what isn't really available yet, or if we have a very specific use case, then we may also need something specific for that. I think, honestly, the fact that the migration from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3 was this big is probably one of the main reasons that Sidebase did become available to this extent. And it was really just the fact that we were using Nuxt 3 release candidate 2, and we're trying to get this running in production for our client projects. And obviously, when working with clients and especially internal applications, something like authentication is an absolute requirement. And at that point in RC2, nothing existed yet. So we had initially then, for our first project, just started developing authentication system inside of the project itself, which then later kind of became the authentication module, but also not quite. So yeah, I think it's really just necessity. What do we need at the moment inside of our projects? We develop that, and then afterwards we see, is this something really specific for our project, for our use case, or is this something that everyone could benefit from?
Totally makes sense. I was wondering now, when you talk about how you created Sidebase, and then also you mentioned that you used Python back in time, and you switched the tech stack now. I wonder if it came to your mind, it's like, let's create something similar like Sidebase, but for, let's say, the backend, the Python world, or what made you eventually move away from Python to what you have right now, and what is it?
So yeah, we are full stack TypeScript now. That's the end result. But yeah, it was a long journey here. So I mean, we started Python. I mentioned this in the beginning. I think the two main reasons were, okay, we already knew it quite well, and this was like the only language besides some like legacy languages where like potential customers were kind of attracted to. So I think we landed our first very big customer because of Python. So and then we worked like maybe 2 years with them, and we still work with them. But like after 2 years, we maybe had 3 or 4 applications running just for them, all with a Python backend, plus a few other customers. And then it was kind of, so we always had this moment, okay, if we switch away, we still have to maintain all these things. So we were quite scared for a long time. But at some point, we basically just started saying, okay, all the new projects will be full stack TypeScript, no Python in new projects anymore. Similar like we also did for Nuxt 3 at some point. So we still have to maintain some Nuxt 2 projects, for instance, and we still have to maintain a few Python projects. But over time, this becomes a small amount. And I mean, why we did it was basically two reasons. One is efficiency. So we put a lot of like emphasis on quality. So that's what we are known for, high quality software development. But customers still care about cost and efficiency. So we sometimes got the feedback that we are just too slow. And then we kind of thought, okay, what can we do? And yeah, unifying the language basically helps with documenting everything better, having more clearer processes, reviews, but also with staffing people. So we used to have the separation of front-end Vue people and back-end Python people. Now everyone is just a full-stack developer, so that makes things in staffing also easier. It makes also things in hiring easier. And yeah, I think everything just got much easier by removing this complexity, and we also got more efficient. So I would do the choice again.
Yeah, I remember back in the days where I was in the front end team, and I would finish my Vue 2 parts of the application or the feature, and then I would wait like an entire week for the backend to also be finished up and merged. And in the meantime, I was working with like some mock data and trying to like get everything previewed. And at that point, my implementation and my designs are all approved, but I'm really just waiting on the backend to also complete the feature while they might still be working on something else that I would then have to get to. And I think this unification of nowadays I get one feature and I complete it end to end in 1 or 2 PRs is really amazing for the developer experience.
I've worked in both sides of that, where in one job I was the front end developer, and then I had the same experience, like waiting. We did the full agile thing, so halfway through the sprint, my work was done, but the back end was still being finished. So then I had like a full week where I was like doing other stuff, or reading articles about front end development online or something, and then the next place I worked at, it was the opposite, where we were all full stack developers. So if I was working on a feature, then I'd add the UI for it. I'd maybe update some database schema, or maybe, try and figure out how to tweak some AWS settings if I needed to. And then from from the CSS all the way down, that was all owned by a single person. And it was scary at first because I didn't know how to do all this other stuff. But you have people that help you, and so that's great. But it's better to own the whole thing, I think, because you're never blocked and waiting for someone else. You just get to keep going, and yeah.
I think also that's why like a lot of people move towards full stack developers, even though like full stack, like of course you still maybe have a more front end oriented focus or maybe for like back end focus because that's what your strength is and your interests are, but you still can do both. And of course you have then people reviewing your code as well. So it will always be a certain quality. I hope you folks out there also have code reviews. Otherwise, maybe check the process. It would be really good if you have. Same for tests, but that's another topic. Anyway, like I understand it's also really good in terms of responsibility because I'm like, okay, that's the feature. That person gets it. There are some reviewers, or like you can always ask for help, of course, but then you're up to implementing it. What I was wondering is, did you switch to use like full stack in terms of you have that one Nuxt 3 application, you do everything in there, so like in the server folder with Nitro, or do you have like external services in TypeScript? So what's your strategy there?
Yeah, so up until now, it's always been one single application that we were working in. We have our first project right now where we're actually starting to use Nuxt layers. Ever since, I think in 3.12, they introduced the auto import from the layers folder. So that was kind of a really good motivation and a good test for us to try and modularize different parts of this really big application that we had. And so far, we're really enjoying it. It works really well with kind of like allowing this domain-driven splitting of the code while still kind of having one single source of truth and one single repository. But yeah, aside from that, all of the Nuxt 3 projects at least have been running on a full stack Nuxt 3 server that would then be deployed or scaled horizontally, however needed.
Okay, sweet. And do you still use, for example, TRPC in your stack then, even though you don't have like an external API anymore, or like are the Nitro end-to-end type safety, is that enough for you?
So we actually still use TRPC inside of all of our projects. I think one of the main reasons for it is that it has a really great integration with Zod, and just in general makes data validation, sending back and forth, also auto-generating types super easy. So yeah, when it comes to our normal development stack at the moment, we would really define the schemas as Zod schemas, use them for the input and the outputs of the different TRPC routes, and then just access that directly in the front end of our application and have validated inputs into our API and validated outputs, which has been making working with data and also kind of connecting the two separate parts together super easy.
Yeah, I also think like that's the strength of TRPC compared to what we have right now in Nuxt 3, because I think we will get there when especially you have like type body or like type query parameters and routes in general. Like the routes you already have with Nitro, right? But you can also validate your inputs. The only thing that's missing is like, okay, you can define for your endpoints, like, okay, these are the query parameters that I want to see. This is the body schema, and then you're good to go. As soon as that's coming, and it's pending for a while, but it will come. I think then maybe it's time to switch at some point. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I also really love the built-in API routes by Nuxt. I've just also figured out it's amazing when you have a small project, but we recently did a head count of all of our TRPC routes for our biggest project, and we're almost at 211 different API routes to make everything completely functional. So 211 mutations or queries that are possible, contained in I think 43 routers themselves. And I just couldn't really imagine the amount of files that you would kind of have and the amount of code splitting that you would need to make this work in API routes. So I think for me, the main kind of reason for using TRPC is kind of not necessarily needing to define single routes for single actions, but just having a lot of different actions, domain split inside of different files.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. Even probably you could do a similar thing as you don't have to rely on file-based routing, as you already know, of course. But I see the point of okay, we just have the functions, we can just call them, we're fine. And not having okay, let's name these, let's have it RESTful, get, post, puts, delete, even though it also gives a sense of structure, but I get the point for sure. All right, maybe that's also a really good point to jump over from TRPC versus Nitro API routes over to another thing we mentioned before, which is authentication and Nuxt Auth. Because I think besides like the create Sidebase C-line starter, the Nuxt Auth module, the add Sidebase Nuxt Auth module, is probably like one of your, if not the most popular thing in the Nuxt ecosystem that you've published and still maintaining today. So also there, you briefly teased how it got started, like how it happened that you were interested in building that module. But maybe like bring the whole journey of like how you got to building the Nuxt Auth module and maybe some other modules that you've built and how it happened and what the current state is.
Yeah, so like we mentioned before with Nuxt Auth, it was primarily born out of necessity. And also back then, we kind of wanted to find a way that we can quickly support as many authentication methods as possible without having to, in a sense, do all of the hard work ourselves. And we noticed that there are a lot of different OAuth providers out there. And as we've spoken about before, once you release a module, people are going to want to be able to use it in all of their projects. And everyone requires different authentication methods. And kind of just being able to support and maintain this seemed like quite a big challenge. So we approached it a bit differently. Instead of writing our full custom authentication module, we very early on found a way to kind of hack Nuxt Auth into working with Nuxt. And this, I would say, was primarily a challenge because we had to find a way to convert everything Nitro and H3 based into requests that Nuxt Auth could actually handle. And obviously, we also had to do like a further layer between that to then not just migrate H3 and Nitro events into like standard web events, but also get them back transformed into React and Next.js events that could be properly read out by Nuxt Auth in the background. And I think this was the most challenging part of it. But as soon as we kind of had the first proof of concepts working and then did our first initial release, we launched with, I think, over 40 OAuth providers out of the box, which is something that would have not been possible if we kind of started at the very beginning. So I think we did do the correct choice there. But over the long run, there were also some clear limitations with using Nuxt Auth. I think one of the biggest ones being that it required a server-side deployed application where the client and the server were running separately. Any kind of like on the edge production deployment was not possible, and static deployments also caused a bunch of issues because you obviously needed some kind of server in the background to handle the requests. So based off that, we then added the initial providers system on top of it and introduced a local and a refresh provider and really tried to make those match the old local and refresh provider that was available in the Nuxt Auth module for Nuxt 2. And these kind of became our answer for statically deployed applications that people could then continue building on more. And these two providers were completely our code, so no having an external package or anything else run under the hood, which was really nice because there were so many issues that were opened on Nuxt Auth where we just said, this is due to Nuxt Auth. We can't really do anything here. Our hands are tied to a certain degree. If they don't have this feature, we can't really modify their package to be able to support this. And now we have arrived at present day. I would say that the usage of the Auth.js provider is still slightly higher than the local and refresh provider, but we do see a lot of people using the local and refresh provider. So there seems to be quite a demand for static or just generally credentials authenticated apps as well. And our next big step is fully moving away from Nuxt Auth and running the new Auth.js core under the hood, which is basically Nuxt Auth without any React logic. And the team behind Nuxt Auth, they created Auth.js. They basically took all of their code from the Nuxt module and split it all into actual JavaScript chunks that could then be framework agnostic and gave this out to everyone in the community to begin building integrations for all frameworks that might be out there.
Sweet. So that means in the future we'll also see like Auth.js, the successor of Nuxt Auth, so to say, fully working with Sidebase Nuxt Auth. I've seen some PRs now of us about it already as well.
Yeah. We hope that that this migration will be quite soon. I think definitely this year. but we don't want to rush into it. So we have kind of been doing like a slow migration instead of doing like one single hard cut with one huge PR that changes everything. So for example, we recently migrated to the Auth.js core functions that were already used inside of the Nuxt Auth package itself, but haven't switched over the primary package yet. But that's going to be one of the next steps. And through this small incremental migration, we hope to generally create quite a smooth migration where in the end, most people wouldn't even notice something had changed, aside from them maybe installing a new package. And ultimately, that's our goal with this, to make it as easy as possible and also avoid any unforeseen issues before they could even occur.
Seems like a smart way to get this started by wrapping and building on top of another thing that already exists so you can get that initial level of functionality, but then slowly adding on extra bits that you need, slowly moving away from that internal piece if you need to, and like doing that incrementally so you don't break the existing functionality, but you get that head start. I think that's a smart approach. Obviously not without its drawbacks though. Yeah.
There's always pros and cons, right? Like if you rely on dependencies, you also have to deal with them. But there we are back to like recipe and only the implementation versus actually having dependency and making it accessible to all the people. What I was wondering, because like Sidebase, like Nuxt Auth came out pretty early as well. Like people were always longing for an Auth module, because I admitted like building Auth can be, depending on the system, quite some pain. You all know that here. And I wonder, like, over the time, also like in the core of H3, for example, and also in the Nuxt ecosystem, there were a few improvements, I would say. For example, the session in H3, the session support, or also what Sebastian, aka Atinux, is building, Nuxt Auth utils came out. How would you say that these two things, and maybe also others that can come to your mind, like impact Nuxt Auth, and when maybe you would use one or the other?
It's actually super funny that you mentioned the H3 sessions, because prior to Nuxt Auth, we actually developed Nuxt Session. And this was basically identical to what H3 has now, but before H3 had it. And I think kind of moving away from Nuxt Session and then also deprecating it after the release of H3 sessions is kind of the way that I would see it. In the end, we want to kind of like use the best feature or best system that's currently out there. And the H3 sessions were done super well, and we didn't really see a reason to keep Nuxt Session around if a much better built-in alternative for it exists. And we are super happy with the H3 sessions. So it's not in any kind of way something negative, I would say. It's always something very positive, I would say, for the entire community. And I think I have the same view on any kind of other authentication library for Nuxt 3 that comes out. I'm super excited whenever I see someone release something for Nuxt and authentication related, because I do know that our module doesn't do everything, and our module also shouldn't do everything. And I find myself actually quite often also recommending other modules, or also very often the Nuxt Auth utils by Sebastian, instead of our module, just because they may be a better fit for what someone is building. I still kind of think that by using Auth.js or Nuxt Auth, we provide like a very out-of-the-box pre-configured solution for people, which I think is really awesome, especially if you just want to get authentication up and running super quickly. But I also do know the drawbacks of it, which can make setting up things like refresh tokens for especially different providers out there super difficult and challenging, or accessing very specific points of the authentication lifecycle. And I think in those cases, if you really need a strong level of control over your authentication flow, then a package like Nuxt Auth utils provides a much better experience for it, and in the end provides, like it has in its name, utilities for it. So I think any kind of authentication related module, I'm always super excited about. I love seeing what other people come up with. And I think it's really just a matter of choosing the tool that's correct for your current needs and your current project.
Yeah, just to second this, maybe that's also a benefit of us doing this, non-for-profit, basically. So there were a few issues, especially with Auth, when other solutions came out and we were a bit unsure how to treat them. Because, of course, you have some competitive mindset also. But in the end, I mean, this is really like our mission is just to give back to the community, and yeah, we can admit if like another solution is better, or also like, yeah, we always recommend like the best solution for the person and not necessarily ours, because we don't have any like hidden motivation to funnel users into a certain solution that we own. Yeah, so it was a bit hard to get used to this mindset, admittedly, but now I really enjoy it.
Definitely agree. Like the mindset that I was just explaining, like I didn't have this at the beginning. When the first other projects were coming up with Nuxt authentication, I was like head deep comparing it, being like, oh, what are we missing? What should I add right now? What do I need to quickly push out without properly testing and building it? But I feel like the longer I've kind of been working in open source, the more I've noticed that there's never going to be too many packages of something, and people in the end are always going to gravitate to the solution that most fits them. And if Sidebase wouldn't be the solution for them, then that's completely fine. Then that's just the way it's going to be. And I think like another major shifting point for me there was kind of reaching this point where people wanted features that I just wouldn't necessarily see as being part of the scope of our module, and getting to a point where we began noticing, okay, we already offer so much and we're maintaining so many different parts of code here. We can't add much more. We can't add more edge cases. We can't add more special features for every single person that could require them. And I think in those cases, it makes so much sense to then continue developing on top of that, creating a new module, switching to something else that then does provide those features. And in hindsight, that's a net positive for the developers. It's a net positive for us as maintainers, because I also wouldn't want to maintain a module that's been 2 or 3 years in development and has expanded in scope so much that I just can't get behind it anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a really good take, and also attitude, especially when it comes to open source. Because yeah, I think if you would have a product that you would sell and be like, hey, this is what pays our bills, then it's always like, of course, if you have competition, you want to be better, you want to be the best out there. But even there, you can say like, okay, look, we can learn what do they do, what could we do better, also what we don't want to do. And if people want X and we don't offer X, then they can go to a competitor. So I think it's, in the end, it's very good to see open source like, hey, we all want to collaborate in a way. And it doesn't matter if you choose like our module, or if the other one is better fit, then please take the other one instead of choosing ours and complaining why it doesn't work for your use case. So I like that toolbox metaphor a lot. Like, okay, you have so many tools, aka modules in your toolbox, and like choose the right one for your job. And like also having maintainers thinking the same will really help to like have this collaborative mindset, because as you said before, okay, people from the Nuxt team make PRs and the other way around as well. So it's like a give and take on all directions to make like everything better for all the users. And coming from Nuxt Auth to other modules we've built, you mentioned the Prisma module before, which doesn't exist anymore, the TRPC module. Are there any other modules that were like on the list that don't exist anymore, that might come up, that are still there but might not be? I'm curious.
Yeah, there's one module that got away from me. And this is kind of really like, I would say it's my sad story when it comes to development and Nuxt, because it's something that I really just wasn't able to do. And I think for the most part, it's primarily just because I had a vision that was unrealistic. I tried to implement it, but I just noticed it wasn't going to be as good as I wanted. And that is probably the reason why I stopped developing it. And that was going to be the Nuxt PDF module. And I was kind of really hoping to find a way to build a solution where you wouldn't really have HTML to PDF, but you would have a kind of more native solution. So in a sense, something that goes in the direction of Vue email or React email, where you have pre-built components, which you could then use inside of Vue components to create a PDF. But I did notice after a while that emails are based on HTML, PDF is definitely not. And no matter how much optimization I was trying to do, it just wasn't turning out in the way that I had hoped for. And ideally, I would have wanted it to be just like Nuxt Mail or React Email, where you build your component and it just renders a PDF magically out of the box for you. But yeah, it just never really turned out the way that I was hoping for. And I think at some point I noticed, okay, this isn't that much better than just taking HTML to PDF and using that internally. So I kind of paused development on that, who knows? Maybe in 2 or 3 years, there's going to be another solution that I think of, or maybe someone else figures something out. I think that would be absolutely amazing. But creating PDFs, kind of still one of those pain points for me in development. But yeah, I wasn't able to find a solution for it, I would say.
Yeah, PDFs are a difficult format. I think there's nobody's like, hey, PDF, I love that format. It's so amazing because it works on every device. It's so easy, no matter what PDF reader you use. I had the weirdest issues with that. Even like just bureaucracy in Germany as well. Like there's so many PDFs you should like print out, and if you like, send them online, then you can't see the field inputs, and it works on macOS, but it doesn't work on Windows. And no, it's really messed up.
It really is.
Yeah, and even tools like, so I've used Print XML, which is really great, and it has like support for the whole CSS paged media thing. But then like you're learning a whole set of CSS features which aren't implemented in browsers because browsers don't need them. And then maybe some like special CSS attributes and things that Prince has just to like get the PDFs to like, you know, break the page at the certain spot. And it seems at first that you're like, oh great, HTML and CSS, I know how to do that. But then you're actually like learning this whole like niche language in a way. And so it can be difficult. And, you know, once you've learned it, it's easier, like with everything, once you know how to do it. But getting to that point is a little frustrating.
But I also get why, like, at some point you just say like, okay, look, I don't want to dig down all the way the rabbit hole to maybe just find out there is still no solution. So I also like, I think it's a good point to like, even though you spent a lot of time in it, just like, look, this probably won't lead anywhere. Maybe it will, but I have no idea how. So let's like spend time maybe on more on Nuxt Auth or other modules and say, okay, that's a better, let's say, a better use of time. And it's an important point for developing because everybody runs into a point where like maybe an own application, even business, and like, okay, look, yeah, we tried, it doesn't work. Let's cut our losses and go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that was also a really big learning moment for me. Because I was doing as much research as I could, reading up on things, looking how other people were doing it. But after a while, I noticed like even if I managed to get something working that does in theory function as it should, I personally wouldn't use it. And I think that moment was kind of like the point where I was like, okay, then I won't give this back to the community if it's something I wouldn't even want to use myself.
Yeah, like you have your own quality standards and be like, okay, if that doesn't even match mine, how can I bring it to the people? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot of amazing development out there, even though every now and then everybody does, once again, you like hit a dead end. Well, turn around, try another way, and here we go. So amazing models to see. So I wonder, what is planned for, let's say, the future of Sidebase and of SideStream?
So for SideStream, we are now in our 5th year of business. I think we established ourselves. We know we have a stable company with very good employees and great customers. So this year we basically started specializing in what we offer. Before that, we were maybe having the same tech stack, but basically developing all kinds of things. We have two main focus areas at SideStream in terms of what we do now. And the one is custom ERP systems. So basically, this emerged from a few customers that we had. So they were like mid-sized companies and they didn't want to take one of these standard enterprise resource planning tools like SAP because they kind of thought it doesn't make sense that I have this well-running business and now I have to adjust all my good processes just to basically introduce like a digital system. And then they came to us and basically told us to develop a like custom-made ERP system for them that really digitizes all their processes. And yeah, we did this now a few times. Sometimes they call it ERP. Sometimes it's just one department that wants to digitize their processes. For instance, we also did like a big project now for the city of Cologne, where like one of their basically departments wanted to digitize something and they didn't call it ERP, but in the end it was basically an internal tool that takes some of their well-functioning processes and makes them digital. So we found this niche now for us and really want to double down, find more similar projects, because we realized, okay, these projects really add value to their customers in the long run. And they also really play into our strengths of, basically building software that has certain longevity, that you don't throw away after 2 years, but that you maintain and develop further. So that's our plan, to double down on this niche in the next year. And the other niche, we didn't talk about this yet, but that's also a big part of SideStream actually. So we are also in the crypto Web3 sphere. So 3 years ago, actually, we started working with MakerDAO, which is one of the leading protocols in crypto. It's like the decentralized bank of crypto, so to say. For us, it was just a normal customer in the beginning, and we also just built a few applications for them. In crypto, they call everything that is not smart contracts just front ends, but it was a proper application. And so we have been doing this for 3 years now. Also actually expanded our tech stack, with smart contract development, because you just really need it to be in crypto for the long term. And we also want to double down here because it's a lot of fun. We have some people who really believe in the space, including myself. And we have this one very nice customer. They actually just today, 2 hours before this recording, they rebranded from Maker to Sky, which is, I think, the biggest rebranding in decentralized finance of all time. So we feel quite privileged to be at the center of this technological shift. And also happy to build Vue and Nuxt front ends over at the crypto land. Despite these guys being very React focused. So actually,
like a big part of the world. I'm so happy to hear like that. There are like so many different areas. I mean, first of all, it's cool that a part of German bureaucracy got digitalized with Vue and Nuxt. That's always like a big yay for everybody living in City Cologne, at least. Maybe then things will go faster or just better. So it's so nice to see where the technology can be used and the amazing benefits for all the people out there.
Yeah, it seems like such very different worlds, like a city government and Web3 stuff.
Yeah,
but
that's also true.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But both of it has its bureaucracies, so it's actually more similar than you might think.
Interesting. Yeah, wouldn't think that straight away, but it kind of makes sense the longer you think about it. You're right. Okay, so that's for SideStream. And how about Sidebase, the open source side of it, so to say?
So I think for Sidebase, it's just about consistency. So because I think a lot of people, including ourselves, we were a bit afraid, like if we really can maintain it in the long term, just next to our core business. But now I think we have a bit of Lindy effect. We are doing it for 2 years now. So it's almost 2 years after since Nearest Tweet, right? So I think we have proven to ourselves that we're here for the long term, and we'll just keep developing on the core modules, come up with new ideas, test them, maybe throw them away, like Zoey described with the PDFs. I think we'll just go with the flow and see also what we need ourselves in projects, what the community wants. So to my knowledge, we don't have very concrete plans besides what we talked in for the Auth module.
Yeah, agreed. I think we're going to primarily really stick with this core of maintaining the authentication module. Like Dan said, we're going to every once in a while throw something against the wall, see if it sticks. I currently am also working on a couple of new modules under the hood, just seeing what would work and what wouldn't work. Nothing at the point where I would say I'm definitely going to release it. Some things I might release privately, some under Sidebase. So I think the future is very open in that regards, which I think is one of the main draw-ins for me, at least on open source, that you can kind of just trial and error, see what happens, see if it works well. I know for myself, there are a couple of directions that I do think would be super interesting to look further into, especially for the Nuxt community. One of them may be also potentially being combining the Web3 aspects of our company and Sidebase themselves. So seeing if we can release some kind of utilities module for interacting or building Web3 projects with Vue and Nuxt, which I think is an area that could be super interesting to work more inside of. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibilities. So I'm very excited to see what the future holds.
Amazing. Yeah, I think this the future sounds bright and vivid. Like some on the one hand very very decisive and concrete plans. On the other hand, for the open source side, like okay, you have the core that works well. So what works well, double down on that, continue, and then see whatever works out. And I think, as mentioned before, like shipping things and also archiving things and deep deprecating things, that's part of the process. Like we all had countless projects, I would say, that are not alive anymore for good reason, but we all learn from them, and it all influences what code we write now, how we analyze problems, and also what like business decisions we make in the end. So that sounds pretty good. Then I would say, last but not least, because we're on for all of an hour by now, we have to ask you the one well-known question. Dan and Zoey, where can people follow you, like you as people, but also you as like, okay, SideStream, Sidebase? Of course, all the links, everything that will come now is also mentioned in the show notes, but still, we want to hear everything so we can type it down afterwards. There we go.
Yeah, so you can find me on GitHub with my username, Zoey-Kaiser. And now a bit confusing on Twitter, it's Zoey_Kaiser. And then obviously you can find Sidebase just under the name Sidebase or at sidebase.io. We also have an amazing Discord community for Sidebase, which you will also find the link below, where you're obviously invited to join us there. I also do regular meetups there, or I'm always ready to hop into a call with people if they ever request it. So I'd love to see you there, chat, maybe get to know you a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, the best place to find me is on X at Dan Kremerov and sidestream.tech for the website of SideStream.
Perfect. Then thank you two so much for joining the podcast, the very first 4 people episode. Yeah, will premiere once again. And I hope that everybody out there learned a lot about SideStream as a business, about Sidebase as an open source endeavor, all the amazing modules, the Vue job market, and all the things we talked about in the episode. As usual, check out all the earlier episodes. We got lots of amazing ones, so don't miss them out. Also the next ones, depending when you're listening. If there's no next one and you listen to all of them, then definitely write it in the comment below, because we're curious if that's the case. Then thank you so much for listening. Check the show notes or the YouTube description, no matter where you are. And thanks everybody, and hope to hear you in the next episode, folks.
Thanks for having us. See ya.
Bye. Thank you so much.